Hello, Dr. Roberts, and welcome to Computer Science Chats. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in your chats, Victor. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have several questions to ask you. First, could you please introduce yourself and your educational and career background?
Yeah, of course. I started out in physics, and I studied physics. Um, Went on to then uh, work in a variety of positions in physics, both in academia and in industry. One of the most interesting things that kind of changed the direction of my future career was when I was talking with a guy at CERN, the European Institute for Particle Physics, and way back in the 1980s, they were talking about the way in which they would record collision events to try and understand the particle zoo and all high energy particle physics. I kind of realized that a lot of the science, the physics that was going on was being done in the data, not live in the experiment. So the experiment was there just to record things, take all that data, and then offline, you could start doing the science. And I think that was a real transformation because it made me realize that the future of science probably lay in data science. And the role of experiments was to record that data. So later on at our leisure, we can go ahead and we can apply our understanding as scientists, but we can also then go ahead and use things like algorithms and bring computer science and many of the traditional sciences merging together. So kind of after that, I guess, personal revelation, I moved um, away from physics as a mainstream experimental subject and moved much more into statistics and computer science. Um, I worked in industry for 6 years. I then went back into the academic sector and I did my PhD, and that was in the late 1980s through to the very early 90s. And that was on then the big kind of craze on things like self-organizing neural networks and connection systems. So I kind of got really interested in that. Um, and then worked in the academic sector pretty much ever since, though, like many people who work in universities, a lot of the things that we do have direct commercial spin out. And so I've been involved as an entrepreneur in a couple of things over the decades I've been working in universities, and now really enjoy a balance between the two.
That's really interesting. So you went into a bit of like what inspired you to pursue computer science as a career, but how was the transition like from mostly a physics background to eventually getting a PhD related to computer science?
Yeah, so the it was made easier by the fact that I've always been really excited by computers. Ever since I was a kid, and that's kind of way back in the 70s. I was putting together kit computers, getting hold of anything I could. Back in the days when most things were based around 6502 and then the Z80 chip and so on. So I got really into programming, trying to write a few games. And I guess then I thought I better do something serious because at that point it was kind of like just for my own fun. And I went into physics. Slowly, though, computer science became a real mainstream subject. And I think in terms of popularity worldwide has really overtaken many of the traditional sciences just in terms of sheer numbers of people who want to do it. So that kind of background and passion and love of com computing and writing code and the kind of struggling to debug things and get programs to do what I want, that was still very much inside me. So I personally found that transition pretty straightforward. And I think the other good thing is computer science now is not just about writing code. It's about understanding the principles of the mathematical principles that sit behind computing, the logic the algebra of computation. And because I had a background in physics, I had strong math. And at least when I say strong, I'd had to learn a lot of math. I don't know how good I was at it, but it put me in a really good place to bring all these kind of things together. My personal excitement about writing programs to do interesting things in science, and the more theoretical background that I had to understand the kind of numerical analysis that went hand in hand with that.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much. Could you describe some of the activities that you do or did through your work?
Yeah, sure can. I think like many people in the computing area academically, I work not just on the theory and methods of algorithms, but I'm particularly interested in what they can do and how they can help solve problems out there in the real world. So I'd say my life is split roughly half and half between trying to push forward the boundaries of new theory and methods for the sake of algorithms. But at the same time, that's often motivated by open problems that I see in science, tech, and engineering. Lots of things I do right now. I do a lot of work in areas like data-driven ecology, trying to understand biodiversity and ecological systems, how that impacts maybe global healthcare policies. We do a lot of work in insects that spread disease, things like mosquitoes, and how we can detect them and work with policymakers to try and make better healthcare policies. I also do a lot of work in the physical sciences and engineering, in particular astronomy, which is one of the areas that I majored in back in the day. Astronomy, like a lot of physics, has become really a way where astronomers record data, and then offline they use computers to analyze that data as well as their own smartness. So, and I'm part of the computational part of that equation, developing new algorithms to try and tease out signals from faraway planets and stars and galaxies, so we get a better understanding of the universe around us. So it's a great privilege in many ways, because I think with data science and computer science, you can turn your hand to pretty much anything. I think the world now is dominated by data, and computers are a great way to work with that data. So as a computer scientist, it gives you the freedom to pick and choose projects in other domains which really fire your passion.
Yeah, that's really cool. What would you say that your like most favorite part of all this is, and what do you find most challenging about these activities?
Oh, I guess the favorite part is are actually the challenges. Um, like many people who work with algorithms, pretty much nothing that you just take off the shelf works straight off. It's kind of this myth that computer scientists have a toolbox of algorithms that just work out the box. They don't. Um, they work a lot of the time, but there's always cases, that 1 in 100 where it just fails completely. Um, and I think you can kind of go, oh, I really wanted it to work, but I get excited. Why did it fail? And it could be something really boring, that there were maybe some numerical issues, or the data wasn't formatted properly, or whatever. But sometimes you kind of find, it didn't work because there's some really interesting new stuff in the data which we just didn't know about ahead of time. So um, I think the challenges are also part of the discovery process, and using those challenges to really push yourself forward and progress, and use it as a way to learn more about the data, the processes that generate it, and the problems behind it. That's really what excites me.
Thank you. So I know you're involved in a lot of initiatives and programs around Oxford, and I also know that you were previously the director of the Oxford Mann Institute, which for our viewers is a research center for quantitative finance. How did you become interested in quantitative finance, and how would you say that this field is influenced by like new
Mm.
trends in machine learning?
Goodness, yeah. So I got involved in it through really just an accident. I just happened to be talking to somebody interesting, and they worked in the finance sector, and realized a lot of work that I was doing in probability theory, kind of like the randomness or uncertainty of answers, and how to get computers not just to kind of go, this is the answer, but to give an idea about their uncertainty or imprecision in their answers. This was um, this was a really good fit with what people wanted in finance, because many times people in finance don't just want an answer. The most valuable thing is to tell them the level of risk. Yeah, it's kind of, it's not about buy that or sell that. It's more about, if you buy that, you're taking on this much risk. And so you only buy things when the risk is below a risk threshold. Otherwise, you're going to lose money. And that kind of excited me because it's a real world application where understanding what your algorithm doesn't know, it's about understanding those unknown unknowns, quantifying them and working computationally with them. That was a real world application where we could really use those algorithms to good effect. So I got involved with that about 20 years ago, worked in that sector on and off ever since. And yeah, it was a great privilege to be asked to take on being director of a research institute, work with a lot of very smart people, and everybody from grad students through research fellows right the way through to faculty colleagues. And I left that in 2021, and it still goes strong with the new director.
Yeah, so the Institute has like a large focus on graduate students at Oxford and engaging them with the work that the Institute does. So how can students not yet in graduate school and like interested in the field find similar opportunities?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. Uh, I can certainly tell you what we do, and what we do at the institute is we have um, a really big internship program. So we offer summer internships. So during summer vacations, students who are undergrad students, they could be freshmen, right the way through to students who may be doing their master's year. They can get experience, often translating the more theoretical things that they know or their understanding of computer science, and learn by taking internships, solving real problems with real finance. Um, as an academic institution, we don't trade. We're not a fund, so we don't have to worry about people earning or losing money. It's more about solving problems. But we have a really strong history over decades of smart young people coming in, doing great internship projects, going on then to apply to do graduate work, going on from their graduate work to do postdoctoral work, and finally ending up as faculty, or indeed getting jobs in the industry. So that's certainly the way we do it. And I'm pretty sure that most universities that have got a major footprint in quantitative finance are going to have a strong internship program, sometimes funded internally, but oftentimes associated maybe with some industry partners as well, so that young people get experience working in the industry as well as in the academic sector.
Thank you. So you mentioned earlier that you have like experience as an entrepreneur, and I know that you also co-founded a company. What's the difference between like working as an academic and as part of a company?
Yeah, that again is a great question. Uh, when the going is good, it feels like there's no difference, because you're kind of working on a really interesting, challenging problem, and that is all absorbing, and that's why we do all this stuff. It's because we all love computer science and we like solving these problems. The big difference, though, is really comes down to the economics of how things get funded. Universities fund professors and faculty in order to help teach young people and pass on their understanding to the next generation of students. I mean, that is kind of their core reason for being. They also do research, but a lot of the funding comes from peer-reviewed grants that are funded from National Science Foundation or the equivalent in different countries, or other sources of funding. In the commercial world, funding tends not to come from sources like that. It tends to come through selling something that other people want. Um, and there is the difference, because not everything that you're interested in academically people are interested in paying for. So if I go ahead and I solve some really interesting math problem using computers, that's great. That excites me and maybe my students in the university. People in business, they couldn't care less. They're not going to pay me to solve that. Maybe somebody's already done it and it's perfectly good enough. Um, so the difference is finding a really good direction where there's a business fit, where the commercial world wants to inject money into what you're doing in your company to get you to do the stuff you're interested in. And if you can solve that, then everything is great. But it's not so straightforward. I think we almost need AI to solve that, because sometimes it's kind of feels really bewildering how we manage that personally.
That's very interesting. So you are our first interviewee from outside of the United States. So I wanted to ask if you could talk a bit more about differences you see between, if any, between academia in the United States and the United Kingdom, and how, or if things like peer review, the research process, and university education are different in any way.
Yeah, there's inevitable differences, just in terms of duration, the way things are taught, and so on. I think there's some real commonality between the US and the UK, and that is that universities in the UK, and I come from a very old established university that's kind of like 900 years old, so it's a pretty traditional place. There's a real emphasis that it's a very flat hierarchy. It's just full of smart people doing clever things. And this kind of belief that the newest undergrad could discover something as fundamental as the oldest tenured professor is deeply ingrained within both our systems. And it leads to a much more informal way of doing things in universities, where everybody engages, people are much more collaborative. I mean, we have this kind of grand phrase in Oxford, where we're a community of scholars, which sounds a bit old-fashioned, but it's kind of nice, because it means that when you come in as a freshman undergrad, you're part of that community. You have all the lectures and opportunities that everybody has. And I think that that's something, and the spirit of that is very much something that I find similar whenever I'm in the US. And I know there are parts of the world where things are maybe more hierarchical, where kind of like the oldest tenured professor kind of sits at the top and everybody else is like in a pyramid. We don't really do things like that in the UK nearly so much, and I know it doesn't in the US. Also, there's a very strong belief in the UK, certainly in universities like Oxford, that you try and get a lot of people in, but it's just that there's so many new undergrads, new graduate students, indeed new faculty come in every year, that it's impossible to know everybody. So what you need to do is you kind of need to allocate them to groupings which are, they're not rigid. We have a kind of collegiate system where people feel part of a smaller community, where they will discuss stuff within their subject, but really importantly, they may be sitting having lunch in the cafeteria next to somebody. They're a computer scientist and they're talking to somebody who does studies medieval Italian, and they get talking and they find, hey, that's really cool, maybe I could use computers to translate medieval Italian. And really good things happen when you do things like that. So I think, again, similar to the US, there's a great belief that you just get people across disciplines talking with one another, and the really exciting stuff often happens in the gaps between traditional disciplines.
Yeah. So as a more general question, what do you think the most important challenges specifically in machine learning and data analysis are right now?
um, I guess I have to talk about generative models and large language models and GPT-like models. I kind of because they've received so much attention. Forgive the pun, because they're kind of based on these attention transformer layers. Ah, it's the most important challenge. Uh, you know, getting human-like performance in these creative disciplines of everything from writing poetry to composing music to creating works of art, I think is absolutely great. But how do we do that in other areas? How do we use models like this, or maybe smaller, maybe slightly different, who knows, to create better energy systems? How do we solve the big global problems of our day, from climate through to energy, water and food? How do we make a better society for everybody? How do we use these approaches to really accelerate healthcare? How do we make better ways to make society work better? And we're at an opportunity now, a real kind of firefront, where many of the ways in which these models are showcased are what we call wow, but they don't necessarily do something that makes a tangible difference to the world around them. They make us sit up and go, that's amazing, I can't believe a computer wrote that. But they don't, at the moment, they don't go ahead and change the way people's lives are. And I mean that for good. I think there's a lot of people talking about kind of apocalypse, and they're going to take over the world. And I kind of get that. There's always, we have to worry a little bit about how they're used. Like any technology, there's a good and a bad use. But I think the really good use of these AI and machine learning models is so overwhelming compared with the bad use, that we have to seize this and really see how we can fly with them and just do a great number of amazing things with them. So I see this as the big challenge of our time. And it may not be LLM or transformer-like models. It might be something different. Who knows? In 5 years, the pace of transition is so quick.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I saw as part of the description for the tools for the company that you founded, there's an emphasis on responsible artificial
Mm.
intelligence. Why is this such an important topic?
Yeah, so worrying about the implications of AI is, I think, super important. Or worrying about the implications of technology. I think everybody who works in the tech domain increasingly is aware that they have an ethical responsibility. As a medical doctor will swear an oath to do no harm. I think increasingly people in tech are realizing that without realizing it, they could do harm. And a lot of people just understandably don't want to do that. They want to worry about the responsible and ethical implications of what they do. So one of the things we wanted to do in our company was at least acknowledge we need to discuss this before we release products and before we get involved in projects, so that we know what we're signing ourselves up to and we know what the implications are. If we think that through carefully, we gather evidence, we think about all the bad things that could happen. And often in things, there are many more ways bad things can happen than the good things you hope for. You think that through and you still feel that you are the right side of the line, go ahead with enthusiasm and energy and pursue those projects. But if you think that the bad outcomes possibly can outweigh, they have higher risk potential in their consequences to the good, you need to think twice about what you do. We acknowledge that algorithms work with people, and the same way that all of us working in computer science think carefully about the negative and positive implications of the work we do, we wanted our algorithms themselves to think about the possible consequences downstream. You can imagine something in, let's say, an algorithm that does healthcare and performs automated medical testing and provides information that says, I've done the test and I think this patient does not have the following disease, but it's not 100% sure. What are the implications? If it's only 95% sure, what's the implication downstream in 5 years of being wrong with 5% probability? that patient's disease could progress. And they don't know. Nobody's treated them. The implications could be super bad. So here is where we need the algorithm to be as sure as possible when it declares it's okay. If in doubt, err on the side of caution. Even if necessary, just being honest and say, I'm just a computer algorithm. What do I know? I need a clinician to really help me here. And kind of we feel that's the right thing to do, to pass the buck to human experts if there is reasonable doubt. So that's, one of the most important things that we try and do is bake this idea of consequence or risk into the algorithms that we create.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, what advice would you have for high school students who would like to get into computer science, computing in general, or even academia?
Mm. Yeah, again, that's a great question. In the old days, computer science was very much narrow. I think when people go into computer science, we do kind of polls. We ask people who apply, why do you want to do computer science? And pretty much just two letters come up every time: AI. So this has not always been, and it won't be that in the future. But I think very rarely do people say, I really like databases and operating systems. So my first word of advice would be clear what it is that you are signing up for. What is it that really motivates you? And make sure that the computer science course that you sign up for has a real majority of it that plays to your interests. Because if you are really excited by AI, you don't want to be spending necessarily years learning about operating systems and databases and kind of database searches and ontologies. So that would be advice number one. Computer science is also really changing. It's becoming a much more numerous subject. In the old day, it was much more aligned with formal logic and programming. The logic of algorithms. Now there's a lot more statistics and low-level math behind it. So my advice number two would be, don't skimp on the math. Uh, it kind of is going to come back to bite you. And theory is never a bad thing to know. It's amazing how often you need it. Everybody hates statistics, but you kind of have to know this stuff now. So get to love it because it comes back again and again in computer science. In the academic sector, if you're interested in going into academia, you're thinking about doing grad work and maybe doing a PhD. Again, obviously carefully, you can't solve everything. You have, depending on where you are in the world, maybe 4 to 7 years to solve a problem. That's not your life's work. You need to be focused and set yourself an aim, which is a particular problem to solve. Don't try and solve every problem in the world. Be realistic. Time goes by pretty quickly when you're doing grad work, as it does when you're doing undergrad work as well. So projects you get into, internships you do, you can never be more precise. You'd never ever be too precise. Always try and start out by solving a small bite-sized problem and build, when you've solved that, build upon that. Don't set your aims on some far goal. Hey, I want to solve the problem of consciousness. Yeah, we all do. There are a great many people for 2,000 years have wanted to do this, and it's likely you're never going to do that because everybody's been trying for thousands of years. But maybe what you can do is solve a bite-sized problem, which is maybe less open-ended, and you'll make tangible progress. So set your goals realistically, and also have a strategy. And I'm not talking about business, but it is really similar. I think it's really easy for everybody as individuals or businesses or academic institutions to say, we want to be the premier world institution for some subject. Yeah, I don't know. Theoretical physics, let's say. We want to be that. Okay, yeah, every institution that does physics wants to be that. How are you going to achieve it? So importantly here, it's great to have a goal, but it's even more important to have a series of milestones and sub-goals that take you on that journey. So be careful. The goal is not a strategy, and make sure you have a strategy in place to achieve what you want. And that is, that will involve a whole bunch of things depending on what it is that you as an individual want, or you as a company want, or you as a university want. So yeah, that would be my kind of top three things. Computer science is very broad. Be focused. Don't skimp on the math and stats. We have to do probability theory whether we like it or not. And finally, a goal, no matter how inspirational and how earth transforming that goal might be, that is not a strategy to achieving that goal. So make sure you break down that ambition into a series of bite-sized steps, which you have a chance of actually achieving.
Yeah, that's super helpful for all of our viewers. As a final question, you touched on this a bit earlier, but where do you think that computing is going to go in the future?
So computing in general takes yeah, there are three kind of parts. I kind of see it, all computing is a little bit like the fire triangle. There are three big parts. Firstly, kind of sat up here is problems. The space of problems that computers and computer science can solve is getting bigger every day. So I think that that's just going to increase in its range. We maybe need to think carefully about what things we want computers to solve. Things, do we want them to take people's jobs? Which is a kind of question people are asking about AI. I can't give you an answer, but we need to think carefully about this kind of thing. The other two corners of this triangle are, one is to do with algorithms. Now, algorithms are kind of things we think of in terms of computer science, but they're not computers. They're things that run on computers. So we've spoken a lot about algorithms, and I'm going to use this as a final answer to talk a bit about not the algorithm side, but about maybe the hardware. And this is about the way we do computation as a sequence of logical mathematical steps. And for that, we need hardware and firmware. And there's a bunch of stuff. It's amazing that we can do computing pretty much with just an AND gate and an inverter. Yeah, that's all we need. We just need to be able to construct at its very base level a full adder that just takes a couple of binary numbers, which are one-bit numbers, and just adds them with a carry. That's all we need. We could achieve that with blocks of wood, with steam locomotives, with ball bearings. We can achieve it with pistons and mechanical systems. Back in the day, 200 years ago, that's what the kind of thing people were doing. Yeah, of course, we do it in different ways, and we do it using the amazing transistor logic and kind of in silicon logic. Things are changing though. We've had a CPU revolution, we've had a GPU revolution, and that's still ongoing. There are things like tensor processing units. There's a whole bunch of these extended multi-dimensional layered processing units. And I think the big innovation could come folding all these things with quantum computation. Quantum computing is not about different algorithms. It's about maybe taking some algorithms that run slow on existing infrastructure and making them run super fast on quantum hardware. So I think the future of computing as a subject is about fusing together smarter algorithms with more and more capable hardware so that algorithms and hardware work together in harmony, because not every algorithm works best on a quantum computer. Some actually maybe work better on a GPU. But some parts of an algorithm will run on a CPU, some parts on a GPU, and in the future, some parts on a quantum coprocessor. And I think that's really exciting, where we're orchestrating algorithms so they're running on mixed processors so that they get the job done with low footprint And I think we really need to break the carbon footprint and the energy footprint of massive GPU computing right now. Is that going to be solved with quantum? Maybe. It isn't right now, but maybe it will be. Maybe some of it will be solved by things like FPGAs, on the fly logic configuration that has much, much lower energy footprint than the big general purpose GPU arrays. Um, I'm not a betting man, but who knows where the future is going to go, but it's sure going to be very exciting. So go study computer science, anybody who's listening, because I think it's never been a more exciting time to be involved in the science.
Yeah, thank you very much for meeting with me and for being willing to do this
It's a
interview.
pleasure.